All right, Chairman, it seems like we are streaming now. Um, we are ready to go. Chairman Davis?
Oh, sorry. It always helps when you take yourself off mute.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, here we go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this August 14th, 2020 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. A note for all listening that a quorum is 7 members, which was confirmed prior to the start of this meeting. I now ask for a motion to approve the August 14th, 2020 agenda. Is there a motion?
Motion, Chastain.
Motion by Mr. Chastain. Is there a second?
Second, Wendell Hall.
Second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White? Ms. White?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Davis?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Okay, motion carries. We have an agenda. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. During the course of the meeting, you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. A note for the record, the board will take a roll call vote on all items requiring action on this agenda. We'll now proceed directly to our Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, and I recognize the chair of that committee, Ms. Amy White. Ms. White.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Chair Davis, for the opportunity to discuss the 2 items that we have today on the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. I share the responsibility in leading this committee with Ms. Jill Chemnitz. Today we have 2 items before us for action. One is EICS 1, and this is Elaine Riddick's ready to open recommendation. I understand that Elaine Riddick Charter School is in Perquimans County and appeared before the CSAB earlier this week for an update on their ready to open status. I have Mr. Dave Machado ready to discuss the current option before us. Mr. Machado.
Thank you, Ms. White, and thank you, board members. Elaine Riddick, our office became concerned that they might not be ready to open. We had a conference call with their leadership and their management company on Tuesday. We asked them to appear before CSAB on the special call meeting on Wednesday to explain the status of their facility and other items that they had not submitted. At that meeting, it was obvious that their building would not be ready. They had not submitted the correct insurance information that we needed, and we weren't quite sure of what their enrollment numbers were. So the Charter School Advisory Board, you voted unanimously to recommend to the State Board of Education that they do a 1-year delay. Since then, we have received a letter from their board requesting a 1-year delay. We received that, I believe, this morning. So the recommendation is the CSAB made to you was that Elaine Riddick be giving a 1-year delay and not open this August. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Machado. That letter to the Charter School Advisory Board and the Office of Charter Schools has been posted folks on your e-board. Are there any questions about this school's request to have a one-year delay? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Chair, it'd be the pleasure of our committee that we vote on EICS 1 and EICS 2 separately. Would it be okay at this time to go ahead and host that vote before we go to EICS 2, or would you prefer that we can do that at the conclusion?
Yeah, we'll vote on these items separately at the conclusion of your committee's work.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So it'll be our recommendation that we approve Elaine Riddick's request to delay the opening 1 year. Moving on to EICS 2, this is a discussion for action today for the 2020 enrollment consideration for our virtual charter schools. Ladies and gentlemen, this is certainly an unprecedented time that our state faces as we work diligently to provide as many options for online learning for our students. Many counties, public school units across our state have been able to offer year-long virtual academies. Many public school units have not been able to offer that option and have denied the choice for families to have the consistency and the stability of knowing what their students will face for learning as the year progresses, as it continues to face the challenges of the pandemic. Today, before us, we have an opportunity to offer some additional students at the virtual charter schools. I have Mr. Alex Quigley prepared to walk us through the discussion that was hosted by the Charter School Advisory Committee. Mr. Quigley, I will turn the floor to you.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. White and State Board of Education members for the opportunity to appear before you today. I will say that our board evaluated this, our recommendation extensively. I believe the discussion lasted over 90 minutes. We heard from the Department of Public Instruction, as well as the leadership of one of the two virtual academies. And I think that, there were a number of questions raised and concerns. So the vote was unanimous, but I think our board did have some reservations and questions, but felt fundamentally that the opportunity to provide choice in a situation that is unprecedented for parents, essentially putting parents in the driver's seat to make the decision that they feel is best for their child in this really unique situation, was certainly a root issue in driving people's vote. And certainly I would say that behind my vote for this motion, I will detail some of the questions. One of them is, there's been some talk about this. I think obviously your board discussed this, and then we talked with DPI. And I think one of the questions that I was asking that I still don't have a clear understanding of is exactly what is the number that we're exactly talking about of students that would be eligible given the nature of the recommendation as it's currently sent to you and before you. So yes, we use the maximum that the charter schools said that they could absorb, but given the stipulation placed on that it would be districts that currently do not have a virtual option, the number of students that we're actually talking about in reality is far less than the caps, that the self-imposed kind of caps that the charter schools said of students that they could absorb. So I believe there's 30 schools that do not have a designated charter academy. If you were to look at only the schools there are only about 6 schools that are in a situation where they're doing hybrid learning and they don't have a virtual academy. So I think that's an important question for you to think about is what is the number of students that we're actually talking about? Because I don't believe that should this motion go forward, that we are talking about an addition of 7,000 students. Based on my kind of back of the envelope calculations with the data that was provided to us about the students that are on wait lists and what counties they come from, that is not, we're not talking about thousands of students here. It's more in the range of, I would say 500 to 750 students if we were to, and that would assume that all of those students eligible would take this opportunity, which we know is unlikely. Most of parents have made decisions at this time. A lot of parents probably have made decisions at this time about their child's schooling, and because it is so late. And those were some of the other questions: is that this is late in the game, and would the schools be able to absorb this? I think, given the unique nature of virtual schooling and the uncertainty that exists across the education sector, we felt that this year is different than any other year, and also virtual schools have the capacity to absorb more students than a brick and mortar without having to vastly increase staff. Although they did articulate that they would take the necessary steps from a staffing perspective to absorb additional students into their programs. I think another concern that was raised was about the current performance of the virtual charter schools, and a concern that we're adding more students to schools that are already have not met growth. I don't speak for my board, but I will say that I think certainly, in my opinion, we also don't. I think we need to ask ourselves you have 2 virtual schools that have built their entire program on virtual learning versus districts and charters that have had to stand up a virtual learning program in 3 months. And so I don't think it's a fair comparison to say that we're comparing the previous schools and their performance to the virtual schools, if that in their previous performance, if that makes sense. In many ways, this year is an anomaly, and parents are kind of often deciding between a host of bad choices. And as a person that has stood up a remote learning program and was literally before this meeting having parent trainings remotely to parents, the program that I'm going to put together, there is as confident as I feel that we're going to do everything possible to deliver a high quality program. There's a lot that I don't know how to do, and I would imagine that schools that have been doing the program virtually do already have learned a lot that many of us are still learning. There also are there were some questions raised about the lottery, and one thing that I raised, and other board members, I would say there was general agreement, was is there a provision that these students would have to re-lottery the next year? So essentially it's a 1 year, they lottery in, they let's say they take this unique opportunity, but then next year the school's cap would return to its original size, and the parents, the students that were there would have to enter the lottery again if they decided they wanted to stay at a virtual academy. We have seen, virtual academy students tend to be far more fluid and transient than traditional charter schools. So I do think the virtual schools said that they would be fine with that, but with the re-lottering situation, but I think that's for this board to discuss. I don't believe that our motion included something specifically about that. I also think there were concerns, are we gonna then make students not attend the school the next year? I do think that parents in this situation, particularly parents, opting into this program at this late in the game, would knowingly kind of accept a unique waiver in this circumstance. So I think I've kind of tried to just capture some of the discussion on both sides and some of the issues that were raised, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
board members. What questions do you have for Mr. Quigley? Or I do believe Mr. Machado is still on the call. You have lots of material posted on eBoard.
Amy, it's JB.
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton.
I've got some policy questions that I think are probably more pertinent for Mr. Machado and Mr. Zyko, but I do have maybe a practice question that would be good for Mr. Quigley. So.
Okay, why don't you have Mr. Quigley first, and
Great.
then we'll turn to Machado and Mr. Zyko.
Thank you. Okay. So, Mr. Quigley, thanks, and appreciate you going through the various issues and deliberations, and that was helpful. Appreciate the transparency on the process. On the practice side, I have a question about just looking at the calendar. With school starting in 3 days, and trying to understand how these schools will deal with the influx of new students and whether they're going to be hiring teachers to address this or just putting additional students into the roster of existing classes, and what other supports they are now providing, or whether they're going to go to outside vendors. My concern is, again, consistent with the meeting we had a couple months ago where we talked about at least one of the charter schools' interests in keeping their enrollment the same to work on quality and address the experience of the students they've already committed to and we've already committed to. I'm concerned about how in practice they're going to serve additional students in a quality way and not just expand class size or outsource this.
Yes, I think so. In the meeting, and I also had the opportunity to speak with Martez Hill, the head of North Carolina Connections Academy, who he's been doing some extensive work at that school, and I think there's a certain threshold by which they would just be able to add students, and I think the number of students that actually would opt into this would determine whether or not they would hit that point where they would hire new staff. I think if this went through, he said we would move to hire additional staff to accommodate. But there are so many details. Part of it might be what are the grade levels that those students are in. If you have a significant influx of lower elementary students, that's a very different proposition than adding 20 students to a history class, as you know. So I think the general response is we are prepared to increase class size in some situations and where necessary, add additional teachers. I would also note that the virtual charter schools do have a familiarity in operating with a fluid enrollment system that is not typical of other charter schools. So they just have students join throughout the year. And Dave could correct me if I'm wrong, far more than other charter schools do. So I think they have a student who has to leave a district because of a hospitalization or something like that. I think they do generally accommodate students mid-year more so than certainly traditional charters. So I don't think that's. I think they would be, I believe, ready to receive students even if it was a month into school, and seemed at least willing to accept the potential downsides to having students that you didn't have from the beginning. But I also think that's something they have experience with.
Mr. Quigley, Amy, this is Dan Forrest. I'm pretty sure, and this could be for Mr. Machado too, but these schools offer detailed plans of how they would handle this. I don't think we have to presume anything about how they do it because these plans have been offered. Could somebody address that, please?
Yes, this is Dave Machado. They did submit that plan that should be on eBoard on the staff development that they are currently doing and how they would onboard new teachers. I do know that the Cyber Academy isn't starting school till August 24th, so they're not starting on Monday. They do have a little more time than what was previously stated. I do know that both NCVA, who partners with K-12, certainly has the ability to onboard new teachers, has access to new teachers. And the Cyber Academy does use Ingenuity. That is, according to their plan, said that they could onboard more students and teachers. I hope that answered your question, Lieutenant Governor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Machado.
Thanks. And Ms. White, just a follow-up, I guess my question was about that Ingenuity, and I appreciate the Lieutenant Governor reminding me of some information we had. It was what I could not tease out was whether or not we were actually going to see additional teachers, or we were just going to see additional vendors or additional class size, and understanding the quality of the instruction we're actually delivering. So I've been given my answer. I appreciate it.
Ms. White?
Mr. Buxton, did you have a follow on that? You mentioned 2 questions. Do you have both of your questions answered?
I have a couple policy questions, but I can wait to do that at the right time.
Okay, I think I heard Ms. Camnett.
Yes, thank you, Ms. White. I do have a question for Mr. Quigley. If we could take a look at the motion that CSAB approved and the 3 requirements that they laid out for attendance at these schools. I've got a question about the 3rd bullet, which relates to students from districts who are unwilling to provide devices and internet. And I'm having a real hard time imagining how that's going to be defined. And the word unwilling is hanging me up a little bit, because I don't think there are very many districts who are unwilling to provide those devices or services. It's more unable. And if you could just talk a little bit about how that bullet came about.
I think that bullet was more a catch-all, and I think unable probably is descriptive, more accurate, and would be the better word to use there. I think that was as a catch-all for basically limited opportunities available in that specific district. And the intent of the parameters around the motion was to say, this is serving a specific need that is unique and different than in some areas of the state than in others. And so I think that was, and also because I believe Connections provides laptops and potentially internet access to all of its students. We know that for that particular school. I'm not sure about NCVA. But I think, again, that was kind of a way to capture when there's not an opportunity here, that is the target opportunity, the target audience for this motion or this opportunity. We're not saying, okay, it's just wide open to any student in the state in any region.
Thank you for that. Could I ask a follow-up, Ms. White?
Absolutely.
So thank you for that. I guess my still a couple of concerns. First of all, speaking as the representative of the Northeast region, where there is a lot of difficulty with broadband access, I'm not sure how the virtual charters are going to solve that problem that the traditional schools have not been able to solve. You can't just create broadband access where there isn't any. And then the other question I would have is how that is going to be operationalized. How is that going to be? How is the parent, or how is that going to be determined whether that someone meets that criteria?
I had the same question. I think we weren't able to sort out exactly. I think there was a general consensus that the motion should be limited and targeted, or the added enrollment should be limited and targeted to where there is a specific need. And I think I asked the very same question you did, is, how are we going to figure this out? But certainly that would be, I think there could be a variety of ways that we do that, whether we look at what the services that the district is documented as providing, but it would require some verification on the part of the school and probably DPI to ensure that the targeted market of students do have access to this and not anyone.
Thank you.
Ms. Kamnitz, this is Dan. If I may jump in here, Ms. White. It is my understanding from both of these schools, because we asked this question too, and there are certain parts of the state where it just seems nearly impossible to get broadband to somebody. And it is our understanding that both of these schools, or neither of these schools, have ever had a situation where they have not provided access to a student. I don't know if there's extreme cases out there where that can't be done, and there may well be, but as far as we know, that's what they tell us, is that they've always been able to provide access in some form to these students. So I just think that's worth mentioning as well.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Other board members who have questions?
This is Alan Duncan. Could I ask Mr. Quigley a question, please?
Certainly, Mr. Duncan, go ahead.
Yeah. I noticed one of the two schools was unable to attend the CSAB meeting. Did the CSAB group have the benefit of what their plans and proposals and the chance to ask questions to that group that was unable to meet the meeting in some other forum?
We did have detailed plans from that group. I was actually using their, they had a county by county wait list information that I found very helpful to determine which counties we're actually talking about. So they had very detailed plans, but we weren't able to question them in the meeting.
Okay. Second question.
Mr. Duncan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if I can give a little clarity on that. NC Virtual Academy, that was a breakdown on my part. When we invited them, I did say it was optional, so I certainly don't want them to be penalized for not coming to CSAB. They were in extensive professional development with their teachers. They had a speaker that they had lined up months ago to talk about equity, and she thought that she didn't realize, I gave her the impression that it was optional. So that is totally on me and our office, and I do apologize.
Well, thank you. The second question is, are both of these, I'm still a little unclear. What is the proposed number that both of these schools are suggesting that they would take in terms of students through this process? I guess what I'm asking is, what are we being asked to approve in terms of the parameters and number of students? And I'll have one follow-up to that.
Dave, I don't know if you can pull up that part of the PowerPoint. I believe it was, I want to say, roughly 1,200 for NCCA and or 1,400 for NCCA and 2,200 for NC Virtual Academy, for a total of 3,800.
Okay, and
again, if the motion passed as is, there would be, the numbers would be far less than that, given at least kind of a basic calculation of which districts where the students would be eligible.
Maybe that was you're forecasting the second part of my question. Was that number then going to be limited by the qualifications that were put on there, or are those qualifications just meant for first priority out of the 3,800 students that the schools would propose to take, just for clarity purposes?
Yeah, I think and Dave, correct me if you understood the discussion or the motion differently. My understanding of the motion was that you would have to meet the criteria that we outlined in the motion in order to be eligible to enter this, to be one of those students that are accepted. Not necessarily that it's preference given to these and then we open it up to all the other students. That was the way that I understood it.
I saw you doing some math mentally during the meeting from the minutes, and looked like you were coming up with a number that would be about 600 students. Is that been confirmed to some, that is the right number, or is there some different number from that?
That would be, the number would be higher if you included NCCA as well. So that was, I only had county by county wait list data for NC Virtual Academy. So that number was roughly, if we looked at every district that does not have a stated virtual academy, as we've seen a lot of districts set up, they had 612 students that would be eligible based on their existing wait list. So NCCA tends to have has a smaller wait list, so I would assume at least 400 more from them. So we're talking about 1,000 students, but that also assumes that all those students join. So those numbers haven't been run through DPI or anything. That's just mine.
So then trying to narrow what's being requested to the board, because this was a question that did come up at the board meeting. Are we being asked to approve this for, as you described it, roughly 1,000 students, or are we being asked?
No, you're being asked to approve it.
Expansion of 3,800 students.
You're being asked to approve it for the full amount that the schools said they were able to absorb, with the limitations on those students. So basically up to that amount for any student that meets those requirements.
All right, then last question to you, and thank you very much for the information you're providing. It's helpful to me, at least, to get better clarity on this.
Yes, sir.
Do they have two virtual charter schools have available the necessary laptop equipment on hand to be able to handle 38 students this following week?
The response that we have seen from them, both in their plans and then in the, both the meeting and certainly in my conversation with Martez, is that aspect of this did not seem to, they didn't even blink at. They feel equipped to provide whatever is necessary to students.
Let me, if I could follow up quickly. There is a significant difficulty in obtaining devices right now that districts around the country are running into with very significant delays.
Yes.
Including in our state. How is it that they would have 3,800 laptops on hand and that wouldn't be an issue in terms of acquiring those? Do you have any understanding of that?
That didn't come up. I will say that I am waiting on about 300 laptops of my own. So I know exactly what you're talking about at our school. But I think the general assumption is not every student would need a laptop. They do provide it where it's needed, but not every student would need one. But again, they didn't raise that as a concern. So part of it may be an assumption on my part. It just didn't come up as a concern of theirs at all.
All right, Mr. Quigley, thank you. Those are the questions I had for you coming from trying to flesh out some additional information. I appreciate your help.
Yeah. Just as this is Mrs. White, just as an end cap to this discussion, I think it's important for us to understand and couch this discussion in that this is not a request from the virtual charters to take advantage of a situation that our state faces during this pandemic. This is an opportunity for the State Board of Education to be responsive to students and families across our state who would like to have the opportunity for an additional choice for instruction while we are facing this pandemic. And this is just one tool in our toolbox that we can access and leverage in order to be best responsive to them. So this is not a request from the charters to say, hey, give us more students, simply because they can. It's a more of us being proactive in using a method and a process at our disposal to be able to meet students and families where the need is. Further questions from board members?
Ms. White?
Is that Mr. Buxton?
Yeah, it's a question it's one of my hybrid policy questions. I think it's probably for Mr. Machado. One thing I'm struggling with a little bit is that there are charter schools that are going to virtual environments across the state who might be A charter schools or B schools, but sitting at an enrollment cap and with no ability to enroll additional students. But we're giving 2 charter schools the opportunity to do that in an emergency way. So it's unclear to me why we're prejudicing 2 charter schools over the rest of them that may be going virtual. I know that at any point, people can choose public schools in their virtual options, but it seems like singled out these 2 charter schools. I know it's because they're virtual charters, but we have lots of other charters going virtual. But yet, if they're at an enrollment cap, we're not giving them the opportunity to participate in this. And so, as a matter of policy, this just seems to be, well, it's unprecedented for sure, but I'm not sure it's good policy in terms of creating quality options, given the scores we're looking at, the testimony of these charter schools, or at least one about their focus on raising their own quality. So again, I'm struggling with why we have chosen 2, given the fact we're seeing this environment happening all across the state. And just again, think as we sit here on August 14th, we don't have a workable approach to this that makes great policy sense.
So, Mr. Buxton, follow to that. Are you aware of a charter school that has chosen to go virtual for the entire year?
I am aware of charter schools that seem to be advertising virtual for the semester.
I'm aware of that. My home district is Wake County Public Schools, and they have their own virtual academy, to which I think the number is 78,000 students exercised that choice. And so the fluidity is that it's only for a semester, and I understand that they're not being promised seats back at their original school if they decide to go back to the regular classroom setting. So the virtual charters are a little bit different in that when you sign up, you're committing to be virtual for a year, and you're not having to be reliant upon other decision makers to tell you whether you're in class this week or in class the next, or online the next, or what happens when a COVID case happens and schools who have returned to on-site learning are then distance again. It's about fluidity and having an option to exercise that choice for a longer period of time, which I'm not, if there is another charter in our state or another school who has said, they want to be virtual for the entire year, I'm not aware of that.
Mrs. White, this is Dan Forrest. If I may address that.
Lieutenant Governor.
I think one of the things here, Mr. Winston, is that these virtual charters, this is their model. They've been doing this for 5 years. This is the way they operate. I think parents can kind of look at this and go, they sort of know what they're doing out here. I know that Wake County just announced that, nothing's really going to be up and running for them. Parents don't expect things to be up and running for the first couple of weeks while they're trying to figure it out. I think even with some of these charter schools that are trying to figure it out too, they're doing that as well. This is a kind of a practice run for a lot of people to get up and going, but these virtual charters have been doing this for 5 years. They have a proven model. I know people will complain about their, D school rating or whatever. We could talk about that probably all day long, but we have, I think, multiple, I think it's about 8 failing F schools out there that are offering virtual charters. or offering virtual academies for this time period, and we're not spending a lot of time talking about that either, and they're going to try to get up and get running, and we're okay with that. These guys at least have a proven record of offering virtual education, which gives some stability to parents in this very unprecedented and unique time. I think everybody on this call knows that I'm the biggest proponent in the state for getting our kids back in the classroom where they belong. I've said that all along, that I think our kids should be in the classroom right now, not learning virtually. So this has nothing to do with virtual learning for me. It has to do with providing options to our parents and students who are looking for these options at this point in time for this very unique circumstance.
Discussion from others. Questions?
Ms. White,
Ms. Camden?
I do have some questions that relate to, I think, like JB, to some other areas that we haven't touched on, more policy and procedure. So are you ready for those questions, or?
Certainly. Go ahead.
I particularly would like to hear, I think it's been posted, but if Alexis Schaus is on the call, I'd like to hear a little bit about how DPI is going to handle the finances of this potential change.
Good morning. This is
Ms. Schaus, are you with us?
Yes. Good morning. This is Alexis. I did provide a kind of a presentation on the impact of how we budget average daily membership, and I can walk you through that. I think it's an important thing that everyone understands the budgeting process with regards to average daily membership, or ADM as it's referred to, and the impact that a change this late in the game would have on the LEAs and the charter schools. So the budgeted average daily membership is the backbone of the $10.5 billion of state public school fund, and it is the driver of the individual LEA and charter school, state, federal, and local budgets. So education, it is driven by personnel. 90% of state funds are expended on personnel, and the average daily membership determines how many teachers the LEAs and charter schools are going to recruit and contract, the number of TAs, guidance counselors, social workers. It's going to determine their bus routes, their bus drivers, computers needed, etc. So there are several different pieces to the budgeted ADM, and the increase in the number of charter schools and the size of the charter schools has definitely made it a more complex process. The current process was developed, it was actually really formalized back in 2015 to ensure that there was sufficient funding for all public schools, and more importantly, to ensure that the projections and the maximums are communicated early in the budget process to allow all public school units to develop their budgets with confidence and request funding from their county commissioners early, and then plan staffing and requirements. And this process is definitely, as it got kind of much more formalized, it has avoided budget surprises, both for the public school units as well as the charter schools, and it's minimized tension between the two. The budget is combined between the two. So where we take from one and goes to the other, it does have impacts. So for charter schools, the process starts back in October when the window is open for any charter school to request an increase to their maximums. And these come to the state board for approval if they are permitted by law. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that process. In January, the Division of School Business, for which I'm the director, we require all charter schools to provide us a preliminary projection of their student membership for the upcoming year. And at the same time as that, this is all to kind of build the budget for and provide the information to the General Assembly as to how much funds we need. But we also work very closely to ensure that we are not over budgeting because in some places there can be double projections. But at the same time, school business projects the membership for the local education agencies, the LEAs, and we do this by grade using birth rates, transition rates, in-migration, out-migration, political events that affect the population, etc. And the charter school and the LEA data is combined and used to build that base budget for the next year, and that's what we provide to the General Assembly during their session. We recognize that in January, when we are requesting the projections from the charter schools, it's before their application process, before their lotteries, and therefore in June, we request a final projection that we use for the initial allocations. And it can be different from their January projection, but what they provide us, and it is stated very clearly that any number that you put there, we cannot fund you higher than that number. Now, they can go up to their maximum allowable by law. Many of them are at capacity, and so they know they will not be growing 20%. And we have kind of worked with the charter school community for them to provide us as accurate number as possible so that we are not overcommitting state funds. So in June, this information, once it is all connected, they also provide us a breakdown of where those students are going to come from. So if they are increasing 20% or 30% of students, or they're a new charter school, they provide us a breakdown of where those students are going to be coming from. This information is provided to the school districts and actually to the charter schools also, because we're seeing with the increase of charter schools that there is kind of movement of students between charter schools. But it is provided to the school districts so that they can budget the reductions and make any necessary changes to their budgets and staffing levels. And so for this reason, that after this point, that maximum average daily membership that the charter provided us is their final funded amount. So
excuse me, Alexis, this is Dan Forrest, Mrs. White. Just as a point of reference to this, we're listening to a presentation that has to do with the normal school year about ADM and about allotments. There's nothing normal about this. We've been having these special meetings of the school board now for months, talking about all the emergency things we have to do to provide for the schools and everything else. This is a standard presentation, and I don't even think it's relevant to the discussion today. I think what's relevant is, are we meeting the needs of the students today, regardless of this? We're not talking about every student in the state attending a virtual charter school. We're talking about students spread out across the state over all 100 counties. No county is going to get hit very hard by this. And we're just talking about providing needs for students rather than ADMs and LEAs and all these things. I get it. I understand what we're doing, but every meeting we've had at the state board has been an emergency meeting to address emergency needs because of COVID-19. We're still in that mode right now. I think that's where we are. I'm trying to figure out how this is relevant. So sorry for interrupting, but I'd like that to be addressed.
Yes, sir. I was asked to provide kind of the impact on the school districts, and the purpose of providing this information is to illustrate that there is, even though these are unprecedented years with regards to funding, the school districts and the charter schools have assurances from our process of certain levels of funding based on average daily membership. And so, and as there is a connection between how we're funding the school districts and the charter schools, this having movement of students at this time is going to affect the local education agencies and their budgets, which I believe, and I'm sorry if I'm taking too long on this kind of preamble, but it is kind of, I'm getting to the point where it will show where the state is going to have to find the funding or where it's going to come from the school district, and the impact on an individual school as an example.
So Ms. Shelf, as a follow to that, Would you not also say that school districts have the opportunity to reap some savings during this time as they are having students at home? They're not providing transportation. Perhaps they won't have as many students eating lunch on their campuses. Perhaps they're not paying for lights and air conditioning. And can you speak to that? Or is there any cost savings that the districts are also incurring that might, as we're talking about per pupil expenditure, that they might not be spending quite as much per student this year, and those dollars might perhaps even out?
So yes, certainly. I think the statement on that would be that every public school unit is in a different situation with different needs, different demographics of their county, whether it's they're mountainous or they don't have broadband, as well as a different student population. And where one may see a budget reduction in one area, they're shifting those resources to digital learning devices, sanitation, and looking at the fiscal year-end figures at June 30th, we are not noting any savings that the school districts have incurred. In fact, the school district reported over $12 million that they expended from local funds that were attributed to the COVID situation in March to June. So I think that, as I stated, I think every public school unit is different. But we are not seeing that at this time.
Ms. White, this is David Stig on Matt. Say a word.
Sorry, had you on mute. Yes, sir, Dr. Siegel.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting, but just to that point, there are some misnomers. You mentioned child nutrition. Child nutrition is an enterprise fund, which means it's self-sustaining, and the money from enterprise funds can't be contributed to any other funds for any other reason. It is only for child nutrition. Even if you have an excess, you can't use it in other areas. Transportation funds have limitations as well. You can't utilize savings from transportation, for example, to hire teachers or to buy textbooks or to buy computers. So even that is the complexity of state budget for school districts is the line items dictate what they can be used for. So where they may incur some savings in some of those pots, they're limited to the purpose codes that are listed within those. So and you'd be surprised, I am, how much, for example, transportation costs they've had, having to do two things. We really do double routes for those in B, because they have limited access on the bus. And then secondly, they've been using their buses to deliver food over the summer and have gone way over what the budgeted amounts were. So just wanted to give that little bit of insight, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the clarification. Ms. South, if you would bring your final points for us to consider.
Certainly. So the school districts currently are in, they have received all their initial allocations, and they have determined their budgets based on that. Since 2015, as I stated, we've been using a system to do this consistently, and it has reduced the misunderstanding and tension between the LEAs and the charters. So this slide is just to provide you these schools are big. So it is a lot of money, which obviously they're serving a lot of students. So that is just to provide, like when we are, everything in public schools is significant financially. Thank you. So looking at the current funding for these two schools, they're at about estimated $34.4 million in total funding based on their current average daily membership maximums. You'll notice that the Virtual Academy does have those additional students that they requested in June. This is the numbers, I'm sorry, this is also the numbers that they provided us in June. So when we're looking at additional students and the impact, and I actually did not have that information that Mr. Quigley was talking about with regards to the estimate, so I kind of estimated myself the number of students and pretty much put it at 1,000 and 1,300 for the virtual academy. And you can see we're looking at about, just for that number, about an additional $15.2 million. These funds are going to have to come from somewhere. And so for the students that would be transferring from a local education agency, an LEA, the state base would be reduced from the respective school districts from which they came, or for kindergartners, it's where they would have gone. The EC supplements, which is about $4,300, would also be reduced from the school districts. We would have to recalculate all the federal grants to incorporate the growth and redistribute the federal funding based on the redistribution of the average daily membership. And then the local funds would be reduced also from that school district. For the COVID funds, we did not consider or anticipate an increase of average daily membership such as this. So the reserves, we do not have the reserves to provide that shift in funding. If the students are coming from homeschool, private or out of state, these students were not included in the budget, and therefore the funding for those base has to come from the reserves. And for exceptional children, those students were not in the state headcount for last year, so there is no funding that can be moved for those students. Again, for federal, we would have to recalculate and redistribute those federal funds, and we do not have the reserve, as I stated. And then for the local funds, it would be an additional budget requirement for the counties for those unanticipated students. If we're looking at just an example of on one school district, last year I just picked Cumberland County. They had 100, they were reduced 163 ADM for the two virtual schools combined. And then there was a maximum, they have been communicated that there would be a maximum of a 271 reduction. So with an additional allowance for increasing average daily membership at this time, it would be an additional 146 ADM. I just took a pro rata share of the students. I didn't have all the breakdown at this time. So their total reduction this year would probably come to about $2.7 million in state funds. And then they would have an impact on federal and local. So other considerations is that if the students go back to the school district, if the COVID situation ends and students are in class and the parents want to move, we would not have that funding to provide to the school district. And on the other side, if the students did not start in the virtual school in the month one, we would have to find that reserve from the state reserve to fund them for their 5th month adjustment, which I don't have the information at this time as to whether we would have sufficient reserves. So there could be a strain on the state public school fund if we were both to look at holding harmless the public school units on their initial allotments, as well as providing these additional funds. And this does set a precedent that we do not have, and Mr. Buxton stated that we may have other charter schools with wait lists that may request.
Thank you, Michelle.
Ms. White,
Board
if I
Member-
could just follow up on what Ms. Schaus just said. I think it's important, and I think I've said this before, the Charter School Advisory Board is responsible for charter schools, and we as a board are responsible for all of the students across the state. And I want to be sure that in order to provide some options for some students who don't have them right now, that we make sure that we don't send negative ripples all the way across the state and end up affecting a large number of students negatively by trying to help the students we're talking about.
Board members, any other further questions that you feel like you need to have answered?
Mrs. White, this is Dan Forrest again. Obviously, we've kind of beat this one around a bit, and I know there have been some confusion on the prior motion. So I just sent another motion to Deanna, who I will allow her to read that, but excuse me, just in kind of simple talking point form, I'd like to offer up a new motion if I may.
Is this add clarity, Lieutenant Governor, to some of the questions?
It does.
Okay.
I think it adds clarity to the question specifically about the LEA, but again, I want to just preface it when I talk about these simple talking points that, about how to talk about the motion is that all I want to do, in my purpose of even fighting for this, is that there's thousands of parents and students out there that are just looking for an option in the midst of an emergency. I think as a board, we've been doing this for months. We've been trying to find options for parents, and I'm not sure why this one's so controversial when it's spread out across the state and there's thousands of parents out there looking for an option. This is the time when we should do things that are unique, and nothing is perfect out there. All these schools are going to be fighting to figure out how to do this in the appropriate way and to be able to provide for their students the best they can given the tools they have. And again, I have to say it, but I'm a proponent for our kids being in the classroom. I think that everything points in the direction of them being in the classroom, and I don't think we should be doing this now, so I'm going to preface it with that. That's where they should be, and I want them there as fast as possible. I think that's best for the students, for their education, their mental health, and many other things. But I hope we can focus on the student and not the system here, and not how we redistribute money in a time of emergency, because we will all figure that out. I have no doubt, and I have no doubt the General Assembly will figure that out as well. I obviously wish we could have done this earlier, but obviously the ABC plan thing came out a few weeks ago, so we end up finding ourselves rushing to do this. And as I said, there's thousands of parents trying to figure this thing out right now, and they're pulling their hair out for their kids. So I know a lot of people are going to disagree about this, and we're going to discuss these things. Again, the charter schools didn't seek this out. They weren't these virtual charters. They were not seeking to do this. They were willing to help, and that's really all this is about. So let's just say that for the sake of time and everything going on, let's all just hope we can do what's right for these parents and these students this time. So anyway, therefore, this is what I'm going to make the motion on. Again, send it to Deanna. She can read it. But let me just explain it kind of simply here. To eliminate the legal problems which came up earlier about the LEA, the mention of LEA or school district in the motion, I want to kind of clarify that. It'll be a weighted lottery for students who do not have access to a full-time virtual academy and do not have access to the internet or device for virtual learning. The number of students that could possibly enroll is going to be left up to the number of students each virtual charter that they feel comfortable enrolling. And so this does not mean that these virtual charters are required to take on that number of students by any means, or that they will. It will depend on how many teachers that they can train and how many devices they can find and all those kinds of things. And this is also a provision, there's also a provision in this motion that does not penalize the two virtual charters for offering these services to more or additional students during obviously this very unique time. The motion is going to require the state board to review the cohorts separately when giving a grade for the year. Therefore, for recording purposes, the students who were already enrolled prior to this date will have a school grade, and the cohort of the COVID-19 additional students will have a school grade as well. The COVID-19 cohorts will not be included in the overall grade at the end of the pilot, but that data will be made available to the board. So I believe this will actually help the board in decision-making process down the road when they determine if the pilots should get a full charter or not. We can see if the students who already had a virtual education under their belt did better than those who were enrolled for the year. So that's kind of a simple explanation of the motion, and I lay that out there. And again, Deanna has this to read if that's appropriate, Mrs. White.
Sure, since all board members have not seen that. Ms. Townsend, are you in possession of Mr. Forrest's wording?
Yes, ma'am. I have it up now for you. Can you hear me, Ms. White?
Well, yes. Will you read that out for us, please, for all? I'm not sure who's in front of their computer and who's not, but if you would read that so we can.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, dear.
For the purposes of authorizing NCVA and NCCA to allow for open and fluid enrollment above the statutory maximum for the 2020-21 school year, not to exceed 2,800 at NCVA or 1,000 at NCCA. Each school shall conduct a weighted lottery to fill the temporary slots as they become available. Weighted lottery preference shall be given to students who do not have access to a full-time virtual school or who do not currently have computer or internet access in their home. For the purpose of this policy, a full-time virtual school refers to an enrollment option that enables students to learn on a virtual platform for a full semester or school year, regardless of whether the district is operating on Plan A, B, or C, and that uses a virtual curriculum aligned with the standard course of study. While accountability remains subject to applicable federal guidelines, for the purpose of evaluating the performance of the pilot programs, the state shall separate out the cohort of temporary COVID-19 students from the cohort of students already enrolled at the virtual charter school. The performance of the cohort of students enrolled for COVID-19 shall not be taken into account when the state issues school report cards. That's the end of the motion, Ms. White.
Thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith. I'll offer the second on the motion. Is there discussion?
Ms. White, it's J.B.
Mr. Buxton?
Just a point of clarification. I don't know that we can not place these students in the accountability. So I understand we've got, but before that, if we could, I mean, we got to stand up and be accountable for students' performance. So I'm not clear on the spirit of the Lieutenant Governor's motion here that we not be accountable for the performance of students that would be provided this opportunity. I mean, I have questions about the motion in general, but I have a specific problem with that part of the motion.
In response to that, Mr. Buxton, Mr. Machado did have a conversation with Tammy Howard, and we did determine that the school would have to, all of the student accountability data would have to be included in one cohort for the school. And so that would be included for NC Virtual or, well, for both virtual academies. But we could, in our review process, separate the cohorts to look at the data. If that provides clarity. I think Lieutenant Governor, I don't want to speak for you, but I think what you're wanting to see is to provide the board an opportunity to exercise complete review on students who are enrolled during the temporary period as opposed to students who had been previously enrolled. But according to Dr. Howard, I hope I'm getting this correct. According to Dr. Howard, the accountability part would have to reflect the school data as a whole.
And I think that's perfectly fine, Mrs. White. I think what we were trying to do is just do exactly what you said, is provide the opportunity for the board to be able to review this decision and see how these students performed related to the students that were already there. I think that would be valuable data for the board to have.
Agreed.
Ms. White,
Ms.
Ms. Camnett.
Dr. Smith? Okay, yes, Ms. Camnett.
We in the discussion, we've hit a couple of times on the fact that this is intended to be a one-year increase only. I believe that's what we're talking about, but I don't see that in the motion.
Ms. Camnett, I agree. I did not hear that in the motion, but I concur that this is for a special, it's a special response to meet the needs of, yes.
Ms. White, it says in the very first sentences for the 2021 school year. Very specifically in the first sentence, the 2021 school year.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I missed that.
Thank you.
Ms. White, do you have anything more for this item?
I think there are some technical difficulties on that side, Chairman. I'm trying to get her back.
Okay, we'll wait.
Yes, sir. Do I have you, Ms. White, now?
I'm back. I'm so sorry, folks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm sorry. Are we ready to call the question? Okay, hearing no further questions, Mr. Chair, this concludes this discussion, and the motion is before us and posted on, the updated motion is posted on the materials that the board has access to. This concludes the EICS committee meeting for the day.
Okay, thank you, Ms. White. Just to be clear, so your committee is recommending the alternative motion, not the motion that was vetted by CSAT. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Before we move on, let me turn to our general counsel, Mr. Zyko. Since I know you've just seen this motion, as have the rest of us, do you have any advice for us on this motion? In terms of legal advice.
I wouldn't hazard to offer any other. From the outset, the General Assembly has made it very clear that admission to charter schools across the state are supposed to be open to any child who's qualified under the laws of the state for admission to a public school. There have been small changes to that mission from that time. And charter schools are allowed to establish some criteria in their missions to limit enrollment of their students. But I think we all understand that because of the unprecedented times in which we are operating, that access to a virtual education is not in the mission of these schools. So I would say that although I understand the effort is to remove the obstacle to admission based upon the student's residence. I understand that they want to say that these students are entitled to admission no matter which administrative district they reside in. The limitation on access to virtual education, and I dare say the computers, is not one that's permitted under the law. The law says any child who is qualified under the laws of the state for admission to a public school is qualified for admission to a charter school. If charter schools had proposed in their mission statement to limit their admissions according to their mission statement, then that mission statement would have been vetted and approved by the board during the charter school application process. So I'm assuming none of these restrictions are in the mission of the virtual charter schools. These admissions have nothing to do with siblings. They have nothing to do with prior enrollment in a charter school. Absent those exceptions, I think the board is left with the general rule is that admission to charter schools is intended to be and is legally available to every child in the state. And that would be my legal opinion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zyko. That concludes this item. We have one new business item concerning some items that have gone before the rules review, and I'll turn to Mr. Zyko for that item as well.
Mr. Chair, we are in the midst of having 116 of the state board's policies presented to the Rules Review Commission for review and approval. That process has been difficult and time consuming. The Rules Review Commission's staff opinions on the submissions that we have presented have brought to my attention several circumstances where the proposed rule that we have submitted for adoption either duplicates an existing rule in the North Carolina Administrative Code or merely repeats the content of an existing state law, rule, or federal regulation, and therefore is not allowed to be a rule. To correct those administrative errors and support efforts to secure Rules Review Commission approval of the state board's proposed rules and amendments to the rules, I propose that the board take the following actions. One, that it repeal 16 NCAC 06E.0202, which is entitled Scholastic Athletics, because that existing rule substantially duplicates the proposed rule 16 NCAC 06E.0204 into Scholastic Athletics. I would also propose that the board repeal 16 NCAC 06E.0203 entitled Athletic Trainers, because it substantially duplicates proposed rule 16 NCAC 06E.0206 Athletic Trainers. And that I would finally propose that the board withdraw from consideration 16 NCAC 06E.0205, which is entitled Concussion Safety Requirements for Interscholastic Athletic Competition, because it simply repeats the content of North Carolina General Statute Section 115C-1223.
We're doing a lot. Make good choices.
These changes, withdrawals, and repeals are not going to have substantial effect on board policy or the law. They are made in order to comply with the rules of the Rules Review Commission and to be sure that we maximize the opportunity for the board's proposed rules to be adopted. I'm proposing that the board act on these matters on first reading because the proposed rules are currently pending before the Rules Review Commission for action next week on August 20th, and that these actions will expedite the approval of the proposed rules. I'm happy to field any questions from the board.
Thank you, Mr. Zyko. Questions from my colleagues for Mr. Zyko on these three rule items? Okay, hearing none, we will vote on these items separately in just a moment. Before we conclude our meeting with voting, I just want to express the board's appreciation to the General Assembly for funds that they've appropriated through North Carolina Public Schools to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as express our appreciation to Governor Cooper for his announcement yesterday of additional funds to our public schools, $40 million to the state board and DPI to hire more school nurses, counselors, social workers, and psychologists in our schools, and $20 million to the state board and DPI to support the academic needs of at-risk students and students with disabilities through in-school support such as after-school programming, tutoring, or hiring more teachers or teachers' assistants. At this time, we'll move to voting on the matters before us, and we'll do this.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
before you leave that Wendell Hall, I have a quick question for you, and it might not be
Yes, Mr. Hall.
at this time. Concerning the $40 million that was allocated by the governor in the 20, at what point do you feel as though the LEAs will be receiving these additional funds?
Yeah, so Mr. Hall, that will be on a future agenda, hopefully September, where we will review the proposed allocation method and policy, just as we have previous appropriations.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, we'll now move to voting on our three items. We'll vote on them separately, and we'll begin with EICS 1, which is the recommendation to approve a one-year delay for the Allen Reddick Charter School. Motion has been made by the EICS committee led by Ms. White. Is there any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, did we get a second on that, Mr. Chair?
Since it came from the EICS committee, it doesn't require a second.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kim?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Okay, the motion carries. We'll now move to EICS 2, which was the item concerning the enrollment considerations for virtual charter schools. The motion before the board is the alternative motion made by the Lieutenant Governor and seconded by Ms. White. Any further discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
No.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz?
No.
Mr. Keenan?
No.
Mr. Hall?
No.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain? Mr. Chastain? Mr. Ford?
Sadly, no.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
No.
Chair Davis?
No. So the motion fails 7-4. We'll now move to voting on the rule recommendation by Mr. Zyko. Is there a motion to approve the recommendation from our general counsel on the three rule items?
Yes, Mr. Chastain, yes. Yes.
And that was motion by seeking a motion on the rules item.
So moved, JB.
Motion by Mr. Buxton. Is there a second?
Second, Wendell Hall.
Second by Mr. Hall. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith?
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain? Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
Unanimous.
The motion carries. That concludes our items for action and our agenda for the day. Colleagues, advisors, and staff, thank you for your attention and participation in this specially called meeting. I now ask for a motion to adjourn the August 14th, 2020 meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, this is State Treasurer Falwell. Thank you. I just wanted to report with all the angst and anxiety that we're facing in public education that the pension plan that so many who teach, protect, and serve depend on crossed a new all-time high for North Carolina, over $107 billion. That is in $2 billion over the high water mark of Valentine's Day after paying out $1.5 billion in gross benefits. So the security and solvency of the teachers and state employees pension plan is intact. And secondly, as we move forward, I know there's some pilot programs going on with payroll systems, and I just want everybody at DPI who's within earshot of this of understanding we've got to measure 4 times and cut once. When you start changing or piloting payroll systems that impacts people getting paid or people having their insurance deducted or not deducted or under deducted, these are very, very serious issues for our state employees, especially our teachers who are under enough stress already. So just a tiny admonition, Mr. Chairman, to anybody working on those payroll pilot projects to upgrade our systems to really take into account all the unintended consequences and all the things that have to be touched and checked off on in order for those transitions to be successful. And I hope that I've never had to talk about that subject again, but it's important enough that I wanted to bring it to the board's attention, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention and for your stewardship of our most important pension plan. I now ask for a motion to adjourn the August 14th, 2020 meeting.
So moved, JB. I'm ready.
Motion by Mr. Buxton. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second. This is Ms. Chemnitz.
Second by Ms. Chemnitz. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Before we call a vote, this is Mr. Ford. I lost my feed there. Could we repeat the motion?
It's a motion to adjourn.
Okay. Excellent.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine? Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chastain? Mr. Ford?
I should put no just for fun, but I'll say yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Motion carries. We stand adjourned. Have a good day.
Thank you.